A young Muslim migrant defeats a political dynasty and might become the next mayor of the most important city in the United States. Can he be the new face of the Democratic Party? Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. In a stunning upset, progressive upstart Zohran Mamdani declared victory in the primary race to become the Democratic Party's candidate for New York City mayor. In doing so, the local lawmaker says his campaign toppled a political dynasty, forcing former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to concede even before the final count was tallied. So who is Mandani and why do so many New Yorkers support him? Rina Mitchell explains.
Zohran Mamdani!
33-year-old upstart Zohran Mandani was virtually unheard of in politics before pulling off one of the biggest upsets in recent New York City politics.
In the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done.
Born in Uganda in 1991 to an Indian father and Indian-American mother, Mamdani, a Muslim, immigrated to New York with his family when he was 7 years old. Before he catapulted into the national spotlight after his remarkable performance in the city's ranked choice Democratic Party primary for New York City mayor, he was a little-known state assembly member representing several neighborhoods in the diverse borough of Queens. He was first elected to the post in 2020 and has won re-election twice. Central to his mayoral run, left-leaning populist pledges including free public bus transport, universal childcare, government-owned grocery stores, and his push for affordable housing. And to help pay for it all, Mamdani is proposing a new 2% income tax rate hike on New Yorkers earning more than $1 million annually and raising the top corporate tax rate in the city from 7.25% to 11.5%. Those progressive promises, along with a savvy social media strategy, helped win over legions of young voters, Asians and Latinos, and helped him snag key endorsements from independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Two of his biggest challengers are now running as independents. Cuomo is staying on in the race for now, and incumbent Mayor Eric Adams calling Mamdani a, quote, snake oil salesman.
This is a city not of socialism. This is not a city where you use idealism to state you're giving everything to everyone for free. There's no dignity in someone giving you everything for free.
U.S. President Donald Trump also weighing in.
I can't believe that's happening. That's a terrible thing for our country, by the way.
While victory in November's general election isn't a given, if Mamdani does prevail, he'll become New York's first ever Indian-American mayor, the first Muslim mayor, and one of the youngest. He'll also face a daunting problem: how to fund all those benefits he promised voters. Rina Mitchell, CGTN, New York.
Time to bring in our panel. From New York, Yashica Dutt is an author and journalist. Rina Shah is a political commentator and strategist. She joins us right here in D.C. And here in our studio, Douglas Sloan is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group, and Joseph Williams is former senior editor at U.S. News and World Report. Welcome to all of you. Yashica, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Let me start with you. You have followed the Mamdani campaign very, very closely. You wrote an article in New Lines magazine saying that Mamdani represents a new kind of politician. So, to what do you attribute his win, and what makes him a new kind of politician?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really glad to be here. I think Mamdani is a new kind of politician because it is one of the rare times in New York City history that a politician has specifically reached out to the working class New Yorkers. His issues and his focus on affordability has really set him apart in the history of mayoral elections in the city. We have seen his proposals of fast and free buses, universal childcare. We have seen that he has talked about freezing the rent for a majority of New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized buildings. And the kind of hope that he has inspired among New Yorkers, particularly younger New Yorkers who have felt disenfranchised from the electoral process. Even compared to 2021, there has been a marked increase in the share of New Yorkers between the ages of 25 to 35 who have voted out for him, who have come out to vote for him. So that is a sea change. And I think one of the key aspects of his campaign was his social media presence, where he talked about his policies, he talked about the issues that New Yorkers were facing. He never tried to pitch himself as the guy, as the personality. He talked about the issues that people were experiencing, and then he said, I'm running for mayor, you should vote for me. On the campaign trail, I have seen the enthusiasm from New Yorkers to crowd around him, to take a photograph with him, to really treat him as a symbol of hope. And especially with what's going on in this country, and in particular in New York at this moment, this has emerged as an extremely positive campaign for people.
Let me,
lots of volunteers. He had an army of about 50,000 volunteers, and they talked about how they have not experienced something like this in their life.
All right, let me go to Joseph Williams. Joseph, let's talk about some of the policy platforms. Yashica mentioned some of them. He's promising free bus rides, free childcare, freeze on rents, inexpensive government-run grocery stores, and tax hikes for the wealthy. This resonated with Democratic voters, but is it going to resonate during the general election?
That remains to be seen. It's going to be a tough sell, mainly because the Democratic establishment is already lining up, not behind him, but against him in opposition. You have Cuomo still in the race. Eric Adams is still in the race. So you've got two guys right now who are running who are they're going to do everything they can to take him down. You already heard Eric Adams talk about how you shouldn't get something for free, and how there's no dignity in these kind of quote unquote handouts. So it's going to be a tough sell amid it's going to be a wash in negative advertising. He has an opportunity, however, because he's built his base from the ground up. He does have a very savvy social media presence that will reach voters where the mainstream is having difficulty in both parties reaching voters online. And he also has an opportunity to galvanize this message across the city and not just in a closed primary.
Douglas, as Joseph points out, he has built up his coalition from the ground upwards. He's brought new voters into his coalition. Are there any lessons in Mamdani's campaign for the broader Democratic Party?
Well, at the first look, you would say yes, because look, at this young guy, he came out and he's a grassroots campaigner. He's using Twitter, he's using Instagram, he's using all these different social media platforms to reach out to voters. He's really running an energetic, modern campaign. However, you have to remember, this is New York City. This is not Peoria. This is not Illinois, Peoria, Illinois. This is not in Connecticut. This is not in Georgia. This is not in some of the swing states. This is New York City. It's very different, very unique electorate. So what is working here in New York City?
Yes, but the majority of New York Democrats voted for him.
Yeah. However, it was not, let's temper that. It was a plurality of New York Democrats that voted for him. If I'm going to cheat and look at my notes here. The finishers 2nd through 4, 2 through 4, 2, 3, and 4 actually garnered 515,000 votes, which is a good 82,000 votes more than he got. And that was just in finishers 2, 3, and 4. So this was not a strong majority. This was more of a pretty weak plurality of votes that he received. And I mean, it's working, but like Joe had pointed out, there are now going to be a lot of forces that coalesce behind likely Eric Adams in the general election that will conspire against him, and he's really going to have a tough road to hoe.
There's going to be a lot of money against him.
A lot of money. The super PAC money that Cuomo had is now going to be in that general election.
Well, also, not to mention, like just really quickly, not to mention that this was a perfect storm, a perfect environment for a candidate like him. Cuomo, very flawed. Eric Adams, very flawed. General election, not a lot of turnout relative to a general election versus a primary. So I think it's going to be not only a different race, but a different environment that he's going to have to...
But some of the other candidates actually do support his platform.
They do, but these are candidates who don't have the names or the firepower as Cuomo or Eric Adams. And certainly the moneyed interest, Wall Street is very... I struggle to see how Wall Street is going to line up behind Mandani.
Yeah. Rina Shah, good to see you, Rina. There's been a backlash against Mamdani, even from the liberal media. I'm talking here about the Washington Post. The newspaper's editorial board wrote an editorial saying his massive minimum wage would depress low-skilled employment, his rent freeze would reduce the housing supply and decrease its quality. They talked about bus fares as well, and his plan for city-run grocery stores would lead to fewer options. I should say that the Washington Post is owned by one of the richest men in America. But you also had the Atlantic magazine, which talked about the magic realism of Zohran Mamdani and noted that his proposals don't actually stand up to serious scrutiny. What do you make of the nomination?
Zohran Mamdani's win in the New York's Democratic mayoral primary tells us what we all have been feeling for quite some time, is that there was an indictment of the Democratic Party nationally coming. And I think it speaks to the moment in which rifts have been exposed, obviously, but the real fracture between the progressives in the Democratic Party and the centrists was shown by the very fact that Cuomo could not win this primary. When you look at former Governor Cuomo, you certainly see somebody who's a product of a political dynasty. But first, he was Attorney General in New York, and he really was, by many New Yorkers, though he was criticized by so many as well for his handling of nursing homes during the COVID-19 pandemic, he was seen to be a steady hand in Albany. But when he resigned due to numerous sexual harassment allegations. And so there was a sense that how can somebody who was so very establishment, double the age of Mamdani, come back and try to win again by telling us that he did nothing wrong? Then you look at Eric Adams, who's been obviously charged with and seemed to be very corrupt. Of course, federal agents came after him. All of this makes for an environment that gives rise to somebody that is a rage against the machine, an anti-establishment candidate like Mamdani. So I'm not surprised. And of course, these margins were what they were, and they're complicated. New York used ranked choice voting in their Democratic primary. This general election, it will be a first past the post winner. So I think looking at this for what it really is, you see an avowed socialist now really having to deal in dicey territory for the.
Rina, from what I'm hearing, you think he could win this?
I think there's a good chance that it could get tipped to him. In fact, I wish Cuomo would just say, you know what, I'm out. Because with him still being on the line, and it would be the fight and deliver line, which is an independent line, and Eric Adams running as an independent, you run the risk of tipping it again to either Mamdani or to Curtis Lee, the sort of joke of a Republican candidate, somebody who hasn't really anywhere. And then if Trump comes in and endorses Adams, for example, that could also give hope to Mamdani, turning out people for him as well. This is a very interesting moment because Cuomo, I don't see him as a failure of a politician. He was somebody who was trying to come in and say, I'm an experienced candidate, I'm a centrist. That just doesn't work given all his flaws that were against him. Also, he showed a lack of enthusiasm. So what I'm saying right now is that Mamdani has a lot of answering to do in these next many months because the billionaire-backed groups were behind Cuomo. But they're going to complicate his life by making him answer how exactly he's going to pay for the many things he promised.
Okay, Yashica, I was quoting that editorial there from the Washington Post. Well, at the other end of the political spectrum, as far as the media is concerned, we have The Nation magazine published an open letter. It was written by more than 24 progressive economists describing Mamdani's policies as a, quote, bold yet practical blueprint to tackle some of New York City's most urgent challenges, above all, the cost of living and massive inequality. I mean, they have a point there, don't they?
I think absolutely. The folks that I have been interviewing through the course of the past couple of months have repeatedly talked about how difficult it is for working class and lower income New Yorkers to survive in the city. We have seen an exodus, a flight of native New Yorkers who have been born and raised in New York, who have been priced out of the neighborhoods, moved to the edge of the outer boroughs, and then priced out of the city entirely. So from their point of view, this is a mayor who's finally speaking to their values, who's finally addressing their life conditions, who's giving them an opportunity to stay in New York. I think Mamdani repeatedly on the campaign trail talked about how this is a New York for all New Yorkers, New Yorkers who stay up at night, who clean the streets, who run the subways, who do the working class jobs, who don't get the attention within the mainstream establishment. And that's why they turned out to vote for him in large numbers. He has galvanized the Pakistani communities in New York City, the Bangladeshi communities, the South Asian and the Muslim vote turnout that we have seen in this NYC primary election has been unprecedented. We have not seen those voters who have not even been registered. Many younger voters and older voters who had been living in the country but were not registered or did not vote in a primary, registered this time just so they could vote for Mamdani because they saw a candidate who was finally paying attention to their issues, which has not been done before.
Okay. Douglas, I want to get your response to something that Rina Shah said a moment ago, and that was that this is an indictment on the Democratic Party nationally.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I think that we're going to start to see the pendulum swing in the opposite direction because the Republicans did such a good job of painting Democrats in the last election as far left-leaning lunatics, so to speak, that want what would they say? They would say, oh, they want men in women's bathrooms, they want men in women's sports, like baseline issues that all Democrats don't agree with. I would even say that most Democrats don't agree with. But the Republicans did a great job of painting Democrats with that broad left-leaning brush that the majority of Americans do not agree with. So I would say that in this next election that you're going to see a lot of Democrats coming to the center and appealing to the moderate base of the Democratic Party. And I will agree with Rina on one thing, that there's no way that Eric Adams or Cuomo wins this race if they both stay in. One is going to have to drop out. I would suspect it would be Cuomo. And then if it's just Adams against Mamdani, there are pathways for him to win because Mamdani is angry to the Jewish community. The Republicans and independents and moderates could all line up behind Adams. He could get some of that super PAC money. Some of the boroughs that Mandani won went to Adams 4 years ago. So he could conceivably pick those votes back up and, do pretty well in the general election.
The black vote actually went to Cuomo, and that would be very surprising because it is not entirely true that only Mamdani spoke to the working class. The working class vote actually was largely with Cuomo here. So Mamdani, though he should be credited for putting together a coalition of voters that either had not turned out before or felt or young and felt sort of frustrated with the system, I'll give him that. But I'll just say, we can't just entirely beat up Andrew Cuomo here. The guy actually did get a good smack of the black and working class vote, and that should be discredited. And that's probably why he's chosen not to drop out and wants to try to see if there's a pathway at this point. But in my personal opinion, I would say at this point, Eric Adams is the best choice for the city. You need somebody who understands how to govern. Though Mamdani has served in the state assembly, I think he lacks a vision. He's never had a steady, real job, and he is a nepo baby. He's somebody who's only been in.
I would like to jump in here
and
say something about the low income vote. I think we have to remember that Cuomo comes from a political dynasty. His father, Mario Cuomo, was one of the most popular governors in New York City. And as far as him winning the black vote and winning the low income vote, that is accurate. He won the lowest income neighborhoods with the highest poverty rates in New York City. But let's not forget that he was the establishment candidate. He came with a tremendous amount of name recognition. All the polls, including the Marist polls, the Emerson polls, they put him way ahead, especially with black voters, especially with low-income voters. And if we look at the statistics as they are right now, we will see that that vote share has been reduced significantly. So this narrative of Cuomo winning the black vote and Cuomo winning the low-income vote, I think that needs to be unpacked and looked at a little more critically about what's happening. Mamdani won Harlem, which is a majority black population neighborhood.
Yeah.
He won Bed-Stuy, which is 40% black residents in that area, and he won Eric Adams' district. So those are things that we need to remember and really look at what's really happening instead of going with tired and tested narratives of who's winning what kind of share.
Okay, Joseph, I want to talk about something else that Mamdani is going to come up against. He's already come up against. That's his color, his race, his religion. He's been attacked for being a Muslim, and some of the attacks have been very crass, have been openly racist. In fact, all 4 Muslim Democratic House members are denouncing what they call racist smears against Zohran from Republicans and Democrats. There's a Republican representative, Andy Ogles, posted on X that Mamdani should be deported for expressing certain opinions. Donald Trump Jr. posted, "New York has fallen." That was in response to another post on X about 9/11. How much of this opposition to Mamdani has to do with his race, his religion?
That's a really interesting question, mainly because my first response is, welcome to 2025. I mean, where these sorts of things have been normalized over the last couple of years. Given Trump's blatant attacks on race, given Trump's blatant statements, it's kind of opened the Pandora's box to this sort of thing. So it's not that surprising that Mamdani would come on with these kind of attacks, particularly in view of his youth, his background, the fact that he ran an energetic campaign, social media savvy. These are all anathema to establishment politicians. They don't really know how to do that. They don't really understand. And the easiest, laziest, cheapest attack that you can make is on his race and on his Muslim heritage. So that being said, that doesn't mean that in this era those attacks won't stick, or at least be, have some voters mindful about whether or not they really want to entrust the city to that guy or that sort of a person. Those attacks are scurrilous, they're scandalous, they're not right at all, but they do have some resonance in an era of Trump.
It's fear-mongering, isn't it?
Absolutely. And fear-mongering fear-mongering is usually a very safe policy. It has never not resonated with certain voters, and it has never not been an attack that people who are desperate or who are uncomfortable have been unwilling to use.
Yashica, another issue that Mamdani has been criticized for is his views on Israel. As I said, there's been criticism from Democrats as well regarding some of what he said. The Democrat Senator Kristen Gillibrand criticized Zohran for not condemning the expression globalize the intifada. He's also been criticized, he also rather criticized United States support for Israel right now. Is his lack of unconditional support for Israel going to be an issue for him?
I think that we have seen this narrative that his views on Israel and how he supports Palestinians would work against him in the primary. In fact, these attacks along the lines of him being anti-Semitic, they have ran across the campaign. Many of the super PACs that were supporting Andrew Cuomo, in fact, around $25 million, which is one of the largest amount of possibly the largest amount of money that has been spent in any race in New York, they focused on Islamophobic attacks against Mamdani. There was a mailer that was sent out which lengthened his beard and darkened it to make him look menacing. And in fact, Mamdani himself has talked about how he's been branded as a terrorist, how whenever he speaks about anti-Semitism, he's not able to do it in a visceral way because he's perceived as a monster. So whether that is going to be a problem for him in the general election, or whether that is going to favor him because there are so many Muslim New Yorkers, because there are so many Jewish New Yorkers who also support him. In fact, Brad Lander, who is a Jewish candidate, cross-endorsed with him and has talked about repeatedly how he is for Jewish New Yorkers. Mamdani has said the same thing.
We have a few minutes left. I want to talk about one other big political development right here in Washington. That is the legislation going through Congress right now, known as the Big Beautiful Bill. It's just passed in the Senate in a tie-break vote, Douglas. What does it mean for Donald Trump? What does it mean for the Republicans?
Well, for Donald Trump, it's great. He step 2 of getting his bill through. Now it goes back to the House where they have to reconcile it and get it out of the House. It may not be as successful there. As I recall, it was just a 1-vote margin to pass out of the House before the changes were made in the Senate, and I understand now they're having problems with the SALT cap and taxes on some Republicans in blue states. So it's going to run into some issues. You know, but this is not a good bill, and I think everybody understands that. Some Republicans are willing to give up their careers. Senator Tom Tillis is willing to give up his career for this for this bill, and he's determined to be on the right side of history. And to quote one of Joe's favorite people, Sean Puffy Combs, all money ain't good money, and they get that with this bill. It's like, hey, this is not something they should be voting for.
Yeah, let me get Rina's view on this. Rina, as you just heard Douglas tell us, this is not a good bill. I mean, we just look at some of it. It extends tax cuts and spends hundreds of billions of dollars on the mass deportation program, the drive that's taking place right now. Also, it spends a lot of money on national defense. And to offset part of that spending, there would be cuts to Medicaid. So what do you think?
You know, this piece of legislation, though it be big and weighty, really stands to risk the Republican majority in Congress. I think at the end of the day, what we saw as this was playing out both in the House side and on the Senate side was that, you know, the Medicaid cuts were too steep for some people, and then the energy funding cuts were too tame for others. And so that is what threatened to derail the bill. Of course, we've now seen it pass on the Senate, but it will go to the House, in which it has to be dealt with again. There will be a vote over there before it makes it to the president's desk. The $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions, that's a real flashpoint for the blue state Republicans there. And I think that's what makes it the highest stakes political gamble that I've seen in a while. I'm not a big fan of mega bills, but I got to tell you, for our audience listening internationally, this bill really reshape America's economic footprint. And though it may boost U.S. markets, the proposed tariffs and the trade policies which are tied to the bill really could strain relations with certain countries like Brazil that we haven't thought of in a while, because what it does is pushes back on steel and aluminum tariffs. I think the world is really watching now, because this bill really impacts global trade and stability. That's the big takeaway here.
Okay. Joseph, one of the other things about this bill that was just passed in the Senate is that it's the complete opposite of what Zohran Mamdani has been wants to, that supports,
Well, I mean, you look at his success in New York City, he's talking about wealth inequality, he's talking about healthcare, he's talking about free services. This is the exact opposite of that. One of the reasons you could almost tie his success to the fact that Republicans are talking about these sorts of things, not in ways that help average people, but in ways that either reduce services, require work requirements, which is an administrative thing. It's not a great look, and I think Mamdani can capitalize on that.
One of the people really unhappy with this bill is one of Trump's strongest supporters. You know who that is, right?
Elon.
Right.
The Tesla guy.
Right, the Tesla guy. And he's threatening now, if this bill passes, to form a third party.
Well, and to quote another rapper, since we're doing that, Jay-Z, more money, more problems.
Right.
I mean, basically, he is looking at a very steep cut. He's looking at making an enemy of Donald Trump, which nobody in the right mind really wants to do.
Yeah.
It's all up in the air. It's all up for grabs. Okay. I don't think we'll know until any of these pieces land.
Actually, that was Biggie that was more.
It was Biggie, wasn't it? I stand corrected.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.